April 29, 1995, Washington, D.C. The spring sun gleamed off the polished surface of the Sherman tank. A museum piece now, silent, still. But Michael Sullivan knew better. He could still hear it. The grinding of metal tracks against French soil, the deafening roar of the 76-millimeter firing, the screams. Michael Steele Mike Sullivan stood before the World War II memorial, his weathered hand resting on the cold metal of the tank's hull. At 75, his back remained straight, shoulders squared, a soldier's posture that 5 decades of civilian life couldn't erase. A small crowd had gathered to hear him speak. Young men in crisp uniforms, old men in faded ones, families with wide-eyed children. In a tank, there are 2 kinds of men, Sullivan began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Those who know how to get out when you're hit, and those who never get the chance to learn. The crowd leaned in. Sullivan's fingers traced the edge of the commander's hatch. You had 15 seconds to decide, to live or to die. No third option. As the words left his lips, Sullivan wasn't in Washington anymore. The memorial, the crowd, the bright spring day all faded away. His mind traveled back across 50 years to where it all began. Back to Detroit. Back to 1940. Back to when he was just Mike. Before the war made him Steele. Detroit, 1940. The police officer shoved Mike against the brick wall, the rough surface scraping his cheek. Sullivan, you worthless piece of garbage. 3rd time this month. Officer Jenkins twisted Mike's arm higher behind his back, making him wince. The abandoned Ford factory loomed around them, broken windows like missing teeth in a crumbling facade. Breaking and entering, Grand Theft Auto. You're 18 now, Sullivan. No more juvenile hall. Mike spat blood onto the concrete. The other members of the Cass Corridor gang had scattered like rats when the cops showed up. Loyalty lasted right until the sirens wailed. My old man works 60 hours a week making cars he can't afford. What's that tell you about playing by the rules? Jenkins slammed him against the wall again. Your father's a decent man. Shame he got stuck with you. The mention of his father stung worse than his bleeding face. Patrick Sullivan had been a fixture at the Ford plant for 20 years. Never missed a day. Even after Mike's mother walked out when he was 10, even after Mike started running with the Corridor boys, even after the first arrest, and the second. 3 days later, Mike sat in the Wayne County Courthouse, hands cuffed, future shackled. Judge Wilson peered over his glasses, studying the case file. Michael Patrick Sullivan, 3rd offense, stealing a .38 Packard, breaking into Thompson's Auto Parts, assaulting an officer during arrest. The judge sighed, removing his glasses. Your father is in my chambers right now, begging for one more chance. Says you're not beyond saving. Mike stared at the scuffed floor tiles. I'm inclined to send you to Jackson Prison for 5 years, but your father has proposed an alternative. Mike looked up, surprised. Military school or prison, Sullivan, your choice. Make it now. For the first time in years, Mike thought about his father, working those endless shifts, coming home with hands so stained with oil they never came clean. Raising a son alone, still believing when no one else did. Military school, Mike mumbled. Judge Wilson nodded. Wise choice. Maybe you're first. September 1940. Great Lakes Military Academy, Michigan. Sullivan, drop and give me 50. Captain Reynolds' face was inches from Mike's, veins bulging in his neck. Mike had arrived 20 seconds late to morning formation, his uniform wrinkled from a hasty dressing. You think the world runs on Sullivan time? You think the enemy waits while you button your shirt? Mike dropped to the frozen parade ground, the November chill seeping through his thin uniform. Around him, 60 other cadets stood at rigid attention, not daring to look at the spectacle. 20, 21. Mike's arms trembled. He hadn't been able to do 10 push-ups when he arrived 2 months ago. The academy has one purpose, Sullivan, to turn undisciplined boys into men who can be trusted, men who show up, men who follow orders, men who lead. 48. 49, 50. Mike collapsed, chest heaving. On your feet, cadet. Mike struggled upright, legs shaking. Your uniform is an embarrassment. Report to the quartermaster after classes, then report to my office at 1800 hours. That evening, Mike stood at attention before Captain Reynolds' desk, freshly pressed uniform, and spit-shine shoes failing to calm his nerves. The office walls bore framed photographs of military formations, battle maps, and a large American flag. At ease, Sullivan. Reynolds gestured to a chair. Mike sat cautiously. You know why you're here? Because I was late, sir, and my uniform was unacceptable. Reynolds leaned back, studying him. You've been here 8 weeks, 7 disciplinary actions, 2 attempts to run away, 1 fistfight, yet your academic scores are in the top percentile. Your tactical exercises show unusual creativity. Explain the contradiction. Mike shifted uncomfortably. No excuse, sir. I didn't ask for excuses. I asked for an explanation. The question hung in the air. No adult had ever asked Mike to explain himself before. They usually just delivered punishment. I don't belong here, sir. These other cadets, they want to be soldiers. They have fathers who were soldiers. I'm just here because it's better than prison. Reynolds nodded slowly, then opened a drawer and removed a folder. Your father sent this. Asked me to give it to you when I thought you were ready. He slid a worn leather journal across the desk. The cover bore faded initials. P.S. Patrick Sullivan? Reynolds nodded. Your father. Mike took the journal, confusion etched across his face. Sir, my father works at the Ford plant. Always has. Open it. Mike carefully opened the journal. Inside was a photograph of a much younger Patrick Sullivan in a doughboy uniform, standing tall beside a tank. The first page bore a simple inscription. France, 1918. Your father was a tank commander in the Great War, one of the first American tankers. Distinguished Service Cross for bravery at Cantigny. Mike stared at the unfamiliar image of his father. Young, proud, heroic. This can't be right. He never said anything about being in the war. Read page 43. Mike flipped through the journal, finding the page. His father's handwriting stared back at him. Today I led my men through hell at St. Mihiel. The German artillery found us. Johnson died instantly when our tank was hit. Williams burned to death when he couldn't get out. Their screams will follow me home. I pray my son never knows such sounds. Mike looked up, stunned. He never told me. Some men don't speak of what they've seen. Doesn't mean it didn't shape them. Reynolds stood, moving to the window. Your father didn't want medals or recognition. After the war, he took off his uniform and went to work building cars instead of tanks. But he carried those men with him every day. Men he couldn't save. Mike looked back at the journal, seeing his father through new eyes. When Judge Wilson called about you, your father asked specifically for this academy. Because I served with him, because he trusted me to do what he couldn't. Make you understand what it means to be responsible for others. Mike felt something shift inside him. The ground beneath his perceptions cracked. Why tell me now? Because despite your best efforts to fail, Sullivan, you've shown qualities that can't be taught. Leadership, quick thinking, courage, the same qualities your father had. Reynolds returned to his desk. So now you have a choice. Continue resenting your presence here, or honor the man who has given you every chance he could. Mike closed the journal carefully, holding it like something precious. What happens next, sir? That depends entirely on you. So, December 7th, 1941. The Academy dining hall was chaos. Cadets clustered around the radio, faces pale with shock. Mike pushed through the crowd, catching fragments of the president's voice. A date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Captain Reynolds stood at the front of the hall, his face grave as he watched his cadets absorb the news. Pearl Harbor has been bombed, someone whispered. We're at war. That evening, the Academy held an emergency assembly. The headmaster spoke of duty and sacrifice, of the dark days ahead, of the country's need for trained men. Mike sat in the front row, his father's journal in his pocket. In the 14 months since discovering his father's past, he had transformed. No longer the troublemaker from Detroit, he had risen to become a squad leader, his natural authority finally finding proper channel. As the assembly disbanded, Mike approached Captain Reynolds. Sir, I want to enlist. Reynolds studied him. You're only 19, Sullivan. You can finish your training here, then enter as an officer. With respect, sir, I don't want to wait. My father didn't wait. Reynolds nodded slowly. What branch? Armor, sir, tanks. The shadow of a smile crossed Reynolds' face. Like father, like son. 2 days later, Mike stood in the Detroit recruitment office, watching his father sign the parental consent form. Patrick Sullivan's hands were still stained with Ford factory oil, but they moved with the deliberate precision Mike now recognized from years of military training. You don't have to do this, his father said quietly. Yes, I do, Pop. Now I understand why. Patrick looked up, eyes glistening. I never wanted this for you. I know. That's why I have to go. As they walked out, Patrick placed a hand on Mike's shoulder. There's one more thing, something I never told you. Mike stopped, turning to face his father. The judge never called me about military school. I called him. The day before your hearing. I knew what was coming for all of us. I knew you'd need what I had learned. You knew the war was coming? A man who's seen one knows the signs of another. Mike stared at his father, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. Why did you never tell me about France, about the tank? Patrick's weathered face creased with memory. Some ghosts should stay buried, son, but now you'll have your own. Remember, in a tank, the enemy isn't just outside. It's fear, hesitation. When the shell hits, you have seconds to decide. To get out? To live. February 1942, Fort Knox, Kentucky. Mike had never seen so many tanks. The training grounds of Fort Knox rumbled with the movement of metal behemoths. Sherman M4s lined up in formation, their 75mm guns pointing skyward. Sullivan! Sergeant Harris approached, clipboard in hand. Sir, you scored highest on the aptitude tests. Report to Captain Winters at Tank Battalion 7. You're being assigned as a tank commander trainee. Mike blinked in surprise. Sir, I've only been here 3 weeks. We're at war, Sullivan. 3 weeks is a luxury. Captain Winters requested you specifically. Now move. Mike jogged across the training yard toward the assembly area where Battalion 7 was gathered. 5 Sherman tanks stood in formation, crews milling about them. Captain Daniel Winters was tall and lean, with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. At 42, he was significantly older than most officers in the training program, a veteran of the last war now preparing men for the current one. Cadet Sullivan reporting as ordered, sir. Winters looked up from his clipboard, studying Mike with an intensity that seemed to see through him. Sullivan, Patrick Sullivan's boy? Mike stood straight, sir. Yes, sir. Your father saved my life at St. Mihiel. Did he tell you that? No, sir. He didn't talk about the war. Winters nodded. Smart man. You're here for tank commander training? Yes, sir. Have you been inside a Sherman yet? Just simulations, sir. Winters gestured to the nearest tank. Meet your new home. The M4 Sherman. 33 tons of American ingenuity. 4 GAA V8 engine. 5 crew. 1 mission. Break through the enemy line. He led Mike around the massive vehicle. Commander up top. Gunner and loader in the turret. Driver and assistant driver in the hull. Each position is crucial. Each man depends on the others. One mistake gets everyone killed. Mike absorbed the information, eyes tracking over every detail of the tank. Sir, I was told I'd be training as a commander. Eventually. First, you learn every position. You can't command men if you don't understand their jobs. Over the next 6 weeks, Mike learned the Sherman from treads to turret. He trained as a driver, feeling the massive machine respond to his touch. He loaded shells until his arms ached. He learned to spot targets through the gunner's sight. He memorized every dial, every switch, every procedure. By April, he was assigned to his permanent crew. Thomas Big Tom Anderson, a farmer's son from Iowa, Iowa, became his driver. Charlie Eagle Eye Wilson, a former hunter from Montana, took position as gunner. Joseph Wrench Romano, a mechanical genius from Brooklyn, served as loader and mechanic. And commanding them all was Captain Winters, who pushed them harder than any other crew. Faster, Sullivan. Enemy armor doesn't wait while you find the target. Mike swung the turret, finding and calling out targets as they appeared on the range. Tank, 2 o'clock, 800 yards. Identified, Wilson called back. Fire! The Sherman's gun roared, the shell finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Infantry, 9 o'clock, 300 yards. Switching to coaxial machine gun, Wilson responded, adjusting his controls. Day after day they drilled, loading, firing, maneuvering, battle formations, communication protocols, emergency procedures. Sullivan, what do you do if you're hit from the front? Assess damage. If mobility lost, continue fighting from fixed position. If fire detected, order immediate evacuation. And the evacuation sequence? Commander orders evacuation. Assistant driver exits first through his hatch. Driver follows through same route. Loader exits through turret hatch. Gunner follows loader. Commander exits last. How long do you have? 15 seconds from impact to potential ammunition fire, sir. And if the tank is burning, immediate evacuation regardless of tactical situation. Why? Because a burning Sherman becomes a crematorium, sir. Crew survival is priority. Winters nodded, satisfaction briefly crossing his normally stern face. Remember that, Sullivan. No tank is worth a crew. Machines can be replaced. Men cannot. One evening in late April, Winters called Mike to his office. The small room was spartanly furnished, with a desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered in tactical maps of Europe. Sullivan, your crew is performing above expectations. You've shown exceptional aptitude in every position. Thank you, sir. Winters leaned back, studying Mike with those penetrating eyes. Your father never told you about St. Mihiel? No, sir. I only learned he was even in the war last year. Winters nodded slowly. September 12, 1918, American First Army. We were advancing toward the St. Mihiel salient. Our tank took a direct hit from German artillery. I was the driver. Your father was commander. Mike leaned forward, hungry for details of his father's service. The shell penetrated our right side, started a fire. I was pinned in my seat, leg crushed. Your father had already given the evacuation order, but when he realized I couldn't move, Winters paused, the memory vivid across his face. He climbed back down into a burning tank, pulled me free, carried me 50 yards under machine gun fire to a medical station. Mike sat stunned, his quiet, humble father, the man who came home every night smelling of motor oil and factory smoke. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, turned it down, said he was just doing his job. That sounds like him. When I heard Patrick Sullivan's son had enlisted in the armor division, I requested you specifically. Figured the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Winters opened a drawer and removed a small box. Starting tomorrow, you're tank commander of your own crew. Sherman, number 5. Designation, Thunderbolt. He slid the box across the desk. Inside was a set of tank commander's insignia. Your father saved my life. Now I'm entrusting you with the lives of your crew. Don't let either of us down. Yet. June 1944, England. The rain fell in sheets across the assembly area where thousands of American troops prepared for the coming invasion. D-Day had come and gone 10 days earlier, but the push into France continued, with fresh troops and equipment crossing the channel daily. Mike stood beside Thunderbolt, his crew checking and rechecking every inch of their machine. 6 months of intensive training had forged them into a seamless unit. Big Tom could maneuver the 30-ton tank with the precision of a surgeon. Eagle Eye could hit a target at 1,000 yards on the first shot. Wrench kept their mechanical beast purring like a kitten. And Mike had grown into his role as commander. At 21, he was younger than most of his crew, but his natural authority and quick decision-making had earned their respect. Attention! The men snapped to as Captain Winters approached, accompanied by a colonel Mike didn't recognize. At ease, this is Colonel Richards, 2nd Armored Division Intelligence. He has new information relevant to our deployment. The colonel stepped forward, opening a map case. Gentlemen, you're shipping out tomorrow morning. You'll be joining the forces near St. Lo, where we're encountering heavy German armor, specifically Tiger tanks. A murmur ran through the assembled tank crews. The German Tiger was infamous. Heavier armor, more powerful gun. A Sherman's nightmare. Intelligence indicates the 2nd SS Panzer Division has moved at least 20 Tiger tanks into the region. Your Shermans will be outgunned and out-armored. Mike felt his stomach tighten. However, you have advantages, mobility, numbers, and this. The colonel unfolded a detailed map showing German tank positions. We've identified their primary deployment zones. You'll be briefed on approach vectors that minimize your exposure while maximizing flanking opportunities. As the briefing continued, Mike studied the map, his tactical mind analyzing angles and terrain features. Something didn't add up. After the briefing, as the officers dispersed, Mike approached Winters. Sir, request permission to speak freely. Winters nodded. Go ahead. Those Tiger positions, they're too exposed. The Germans wouldn't deploy that way unless... Unless what, Sullivan? Unless it's a trap, sir. They're positioning to draw us into an ambush corridor. Winters studied him. Bold assessment based on a map glance. My father mentioned German tank tactics from the last war. They'd sacrifice position visibility for ambush potential. Colonel Richards has extensive intelligence resources, Sullivan. Multiple confirmations of these positions. Yes, sir. Winters looked at him for a long moment. I'll pass your concerns up the chain. Now prep your crew. We move at 0600. That night, Mike couldn't sleep. The image of the map burned in his mind, the wrongness of it gnawing at him. At 0300, he gave up and walked to the command tent, intending to review the maps again. He found Winters already there, poring over communications transcripts. Sullivan couldn't sleep? No, sir. Still thinking about those Tiger positions. Winters motioned him over. You may be onto something. These are intercepted German communications from the past 48 hours. References to Fala and Kafig. Trap and cage, sir. They're creating a kill box. Winters nodded grimly. I've been trying to reach Colonel Richards. No success. We deploy in 3 hours, sir. I'm aware of the timeline, Sullivan. Mike hesitated, then pressed forward. Sir, if we go in as planned, we're driving straight into their guns. Winters studied the maps and transcripts. his face etched with concern. Richards outranks me. These are his orders. With respect, sir, they're suicide orders. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Winters straightened. Get your crew ready, Commander. That's an order. Yes, sir. Mike turned to leave, disappointment heavy in his chest. And Sullivan? He paused at the tent entrance. Make sure your men know the emergency evacuation procedures. Every second will count tomorrow. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Yes, sir. As Mike walked back to his barracks, the weight of command pressed down on him. Tomorrow they would cross the channel. Tomorrow they would enter the war his father had fought 26 years earlier. Tomorrow he would lead men into battle, and potentially to their deaths. In the pre-dawn darkness, Mike gathered his crew beside Thunderbolt. Their faces were solemn in the dim light. Listen up. Today we cross into France. Today we become combat veterans. He looked at each man in turn. Big Tom, solid and dependable. Eagle Eye, keen and focused. Wrench, clever and determined. I need to be completely honest with you. Intelligence has identified German Tiger positions near St. Lo, but I believe we're heading into a trap. The men exchanged glances. I've shared my concerns with Captain Winters. Until we receive new orders, we proceed as planned. But I want everyone especially alert, and I want everyone to remember the evacuation procedures. You expecting us to get hit, boss? Wrench asked quietly. Mike looked at his crew, these men whose lives were in his hands. I'm expecting us to be ready for anything. This isn't training anymore. Out there, mistakes cost lives. He placed his hand on the cold metal of their Sherman. We look out for each other. We follow procedure. We stay sharp. That's how we all come home. As the sun rose over the English coast, Mike climbed into the commander's position, his mind racing with preparations and contingencies. Through his hatch, he watched the massive landing craft approach, ready to carry them across the channel to war. His hand slipped into his pocket, feeling the worn leather of his father's journal. The lessons of one generation passed to the next, the burdens of command, the weight of responsibility. In his mind, he heard his father's voice again. In a tank, when the shell hits, you have 15 seconds to decide. To live or die, no third option. Mike took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. As the first rays of morning sun glinted off Thunderbolt's hull, Michael "Steel Mike" Sullivan prepared to forge his own legacy in the fires of war. The journey had just begun. June 18, 1944. Approaching St. Lo, France. The French countryside should have been beautiful. Rolling hills dotted with ancient stone farmhouses, apple orchards heavy with early summer fruit, fields of wheat rippling in the breeze like a golden sea. But war had transformed this pastoral landscape into something alien and menacing. Hedgerows divided the fields into a deadly maze, each earthen wall 6 feet high, tangled with centuries-old roots, perfect cover for German anti-tank guns. Shell craters pockmarked the once pristine farmland. Burned-out vehicles littered the narrow country roads. From his commander's position, Mike Sullivan surveyed the terrain through binoculars. Thunderbolt rolled steadily forward, the 5th tank in a column of Shermans advancing towards St. Lo. The rhythm of the tank's movement had become familiar over the past week since landing in Normandy, but the tension coiling in his gut was entirely new. Eyes sharp, Eagle Eye, Mike called down to his gunner. Germans like to hide anti-tank guns in the hedgerow gaps. Watching every shadow, boss, Wilson replied, his Montana drawl unchanged by the gravity of their situation. The radio crackled with Captain Winters' voice. All units, maintain formation. 1 kilometer to phase line Alpha. Phase line Alpha. The intelligence map had marked it as the forward edge of German defenses. Beyond that line lay the reported positions of the Tiger tanks that Colonel Richards had briefed them on. The positions Mike believed were bait for a trap. Big Tom, any problems with the terrain? Mike asked his driver. Handling fine, Commander, Anderson replied. Ground's firm enough for now. Rain might change that. Mike glanced at the sky. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising afternoon storms. Rain would turn these fields to mud, limiting their mobility advantage against the heavier German tanks. Wrench, ammunition status? Fully loaded, boss. 75 shells for the main gun, 2,000 rounds for the machine guns. Ready to rock and roll. Mike smiled despite the tension. Romano's Brooklyn enthusiasm remained undimmed by a week in combat. So far, their baptism of fire had been relatively gentle. Artillery exchanges in the distance, occasional sniper fire, one brief skirmish with a German reconnaissance unit that fled rather than engage. The true test still awaited them. The column approached a small stone bridge spanning a narrow stream. Mike studied it through his binoculars. The perfect choke point for an ambush. He keyed his radio. Thunderbolt to Ramrod Actual. That bridge looks suspicious. Request permission to hold position while scouts check it. Winter's voice came back immediately. Negative, Thunderbolt. Orders from command are to maintain momentum. Proceed with caution. Mike frowned. Momentum at the expense of caution would get men killed. But orders were orders. Roger that, proceeding. The lead Sherman crossed the bridge without incident. Then the second. As the third tank reached the midpoint, Mike's instincts screamed a warning. He grabbed his radio. All units take evasive action. Ambush! The words had barely left his mouth when the world exploded. A hidden German 88mm anti-tank gun fired from a concealed position in the hedgerow, its rounds striking the third Sherman directly in its side armor. The American tank erupted in a geyser of flame and black smoke. Hard right, Mike shouted to Big Tom. Get us off the road. The Sherman lurched as Anderson wrenched the controls, sending them crashing through a wooden fence into an adjacent field. All around them, the other tanks scattered, seeking cover as more German guns opened fire. Eagle Eye, find that 88 and put a shell in it. Wilson swung the turret, searching frantically for the hidden gun. 2 o'clock. Behind the stone wall, Mike called, spotting the German position. Target acquired. Fire! Thunderbolt 75mm roared, the shell screaming toward the German position. Stone and earth erupted as it found its mark. Through the smoke, Mike saw German gunners scattering. Hit! Adjusting fire, Wilson called. The radio filled with a frantic chatter as the ambushed column reorganized. 2 Shermans were burning now, black smoke billowing into the summer sky. Captain Winter's voice cut through the chaos. All units, rally at grid point Echo 37, fall back by squads, covering fire. You heard the man, Mike called to his crew. Big Tom, reverse course. Eagle Eye, keep that gun suppressed. Wrench, be ready with smoke if we need cover. As Thunderbolt backed away from the engagement area, Mike watched helplessly as men scrambled from one of the burning Shermans. The evacuation drill they had practiced so many times now played out in desperate reality. He counted the escaping crew members. 1, 2, 3. Where were the other 2? The answer came seconds later as the tank's ammunition ignited, sending the turret flying upward in a catastrophic explosion. No one else would be coming out. Mike swallowed hard, remembering his father's words. When the shell hits, you have 15 seconds to decide. These men had run out of time. An hour later, the surviving tanks of the company regrouped in a small wooded area 2 kilometers from the ambush site. Rain had begun to fall, drumming on Thunderbolt's metal hull. Mike stood with the other tank commanders in a tight circle around Captain Winters, water streaming from their helmets. We lost 3 tanks, Winters said grimly, 11 men, and we're no closer to our objective. Sir, with respect, this confirms what Commander Sullivan suspected, said Lieutenant Parker, commander of the 2nd tank. The German positions in our briefing were deliberate misinformation. All eyes turned to Mike. He shifted uncomfortably under their gaze. I believe the entire approach to St. Lo has been compromised, Mike said carefully. The Germans knew exactly where we'd be. Those weren't random 88s. They were waiting for us. Winters nodded slowly. I've reached the same conclusion. The question is how they knew our route. Could be a security breach at division, suggested another commander, or local collaborators. Speculation won't help us now, Winters said. What matters is our next move. I've requested new orders from battalion, but communications are spotty in this weather. He unfolded a sodden map, protected from the worst of the rain by his jacket. Our primary mission remains, locate and engage the German armor near St. Lo, but we'll choose our own approach route. He looked at Mike. Sullivan, you seem to have a nose for German traps. Any suggestions? Mike studied the map, tracing possible routes with his finger. The Germans expect us to use the main roads or open fields where our numbers give us advantage. I'd suggest we use these smaller farm tracks, approach from the southwest instead of the east. It's slower going but less predictable. Winters considered the suggestion, then nodded. We'll move at dusk. Maintenance crews are working to repair one of the damaged tanks. We'll proceed with what we have. He looked at each commander in turn. Check your crews and equipment. Be ready to move in 3 hours. As the commanders dispersed, Winters held Mike back. Good call on that bridge, Sullivan. If you hadn't given that warning, we might have lost the entire column. Not good enough, sir. We still lost 3 tanks. That's war, Commander. You don't measure success by perfect outcomes. You measure it by how many men come home despite the hell thrown at them. Winters paused, studying him. Your father understood that. Mike nodded, grateful for the captain's words, but still feeling the weight of those lost lives. Get some food into your crew, Winters said. Long night ahead. Mike returned to Thunderbolt to find his men already conducting maintenance despite the rain. Wrench was half inside the engine compartment. Big Tom checked the tracks, while Eagle Eye cleaned the gun barrel. Good men, his men. Status report, Mike called. Engine's running hot, Wrench replied, voice muffled from inside the compartment. Cooling system needs work. Give me an hour. Track tension good on port side. Starboard needs adjustment, Big Tom added. Gun sights took a beating from that rough field crossing, Eagle Eye said. Recalibrated, but we should test fire before serious engagement. Mike nodded, pride momentarily displacing his concern. Make it happen. We move in 3 hours. New route approaching from the southwest. Going around their welcoming committee? Wrench emerged, face streaked with grease and rain. That's the plan, but stay sharp. Germans are nothing if not thorough. As his crew returned to their tasks, Mike climbed back into the tank to check their ammunition stores. The interior smelled of cordite, oil, and sweat. This small metal box had become their world, their home, their potential coffin. He ran through the evacuation procedure again in his mind. Driver and assistant driver through the front hatch, loader and gunner through the turret, commander last, 15 seconds from impact to potential ammunition fire. Less if the hit was catastrophic. You look like you've seen a ghost, boss. Mike turned to find Eagle Eye watching him from the gunner's position. Just thinking. About those tanks we lost? Mike nodded. I knew some of those men from training. Wilson sighed. My pa used to say there's 2 types of thinking, the kind that keeps you alive and the kind that paralyzes you. Trick is knowing which is which. Your father sounds like a wise man. Montana cattle rancher. Never finished school, but he knew people. Wilson adjusted his gun sight. Those men today, nothing you could have done differently would have saved them. That's the kind of thinking that paralyzes. Mike considered this. And the kind that keeps you alive. That's where you focus now. On our approach tonight. On how we engage those tigers without becoming their next meal. Wilson tapped his head. Keep the ghosts out until the job's done. Plenty of time for them later. Before Mike could respond, Wrench's voice called from outside. Commander, Captain Winters needs all tank commanders. Mike clasped Wilson's shoulder in silent thanks, then climbed out of the tank. The rain had intensified, turning the ground to thick mud that sucked at his boots. He found Winters with a young lieutenant Mike didn't recognize. The officer's uniform was clean, unmarked by combat, a staff officer from Division. Gentlemen, this is Lieutenant Hayes from Division Intelligence, Winters announced as the tank commanders gathered. He has new information and orders. Hayes unfolded a fresh map, struggling to keep it dry in the downpour. Aerial reconnaissance has identified a concentration of German armor in this valley, approximately 7 kilometers southwest of St. Lo. He pointed to a location marked in red. We believe it's their reserve force, including at least 5 Tiger tanks. Mike studied the map. The location was nowhere near the positions they had been given originally. Our primary mission remains unchanged, Hayes continued. Engage and destroy enemy armor. However, Division has added a secondary objective. He pointed to a small village near the valley. Belleville. Intelligence suggests the Germans are using the church tower as an observation post directing artillery onto our advancing infantry. You're to neutralize that position on your approach. Winters looked at his commanders. Questions? Rules of engagement regarding the church? One of the commanders asked. Minimize collateral damage if possible, Hayes replied. But the observation post must be eliminated. Civilian presence in the village? Mike asked. Hayes shrugged. Unknown. Most locals have fled, but we can't guarantee the village is empty. Mike exchanged glances with Winters. They both recognized the impossible calculation they were being asked to make. Route suggestions? Winters asked, turning back to Hayes. Division recommends this approach through the valley from the south. Provides cover from German artillery on the ridgelines. Mike studied the proposed route, alarm bells ringing in his mind. Sir, that valley is a perfect kill zone, no cover, limited maneuverability. If German armor is positioned on either ridge, we'd be shooting fish in a barrel. Hayes frowned. The reconnaissance shows clear ridgelines. With respect, Lieutenant, aerial reconnaissance can't see camouflage positions, and the Germans excel at camouflage. Winters intervened before the tension could escalate. We'll take Division's intelligence under advisement, Lieutenant. Please inform your superiors that we will engage the enemy armor and neutralize the observation post, but tactical approach will be determined by ground conditions. Hayes clearly wasn't pleased, but he nodded stiffly. I'll relay your response, Captain. After the lieutenant departed, Winters turned to his commanders. Sullivan's alternative approach stands. We move in small groups, using terrain for concealment. Parker, your platoon will handle the observation post in Belleville. Sullivan, your tanks will circle wide and approach the German armor position from the east at dawn. The commanders nodded, accepting their assignments. One more thing, Winters added. Division's intelligence has been compromised once already today. Trust your instincts over their maps. Dismissed. As darkness fell, the rain finally stopped. A half-moon occasionally emerged from the clouds, casting silver light over the muddy landscape. Thunderbolt led a column of 3 Shermans along a narrow farm track that wound between ancient hedgerows. Mike stood in his hatch, night vision slowly adapting to the darkness. Keep it slow, Big Tom, he called down to his driver. No engine noise if we can help it. The Sherman crept forward at walking pace, its engine barely above idle. In the distance, artillery flashed like heat lightning, accompanied by the low rumble of shells landing somewhere to the north. Intersection ahead, Anderson called up. Which way, Commander? Mike consulted his map by the dim red light of his covered flashlight. Left. Should put us on the south edge of Belleville in about 2 kilometers. The tanks turned onto an even narrower track, forcing them to proceed in single file. The confined space between hedgerows made Mike increasingly uneasy. If they encountered enemy forces here, there would be no room to maneuver. An hour of tense advance brought them to the outskirts of Belleville. The small Norman village consisted of perhaps 30 stone buildings clustered around a central square, dominated by a church with a tall bell tower. All was dark, the village apparently deserted. Mike raised his binoculars, studying the church tower. No movement, no light. But that didn't mean it wasn't being used as an observation post. He keyed his radio. Ramrod 2, this is Thunderbolt. We've reached the village southern edge. No obvious activity in the church tower. Your call on approach. Lieutenant Parker's voice came back immediately. Understood, Thunderbolt. Hold position and provide overwatch. We'll advance to investigate. Mike watched as Parker's 2 tanks emerged from the darkness, advancing slowly toward the village center. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant artillery and the low rumble of tank engines. Suddenly, a flash of light from the church tower. Mike's heart jumped. Contact! Flare from the tower! Parker, fall back! Too late. German anti-tank guns hidden in the buildings around the square opened fire simultaneously. Parker's lead tank took a direct hit, its turret engulfed in flames. Eagle Eye, target that tower! Fire! Wilson rotated the turret, the 75mm cannon roaring in the night. The shell struck the church tower dead center, sending stone and debris showering down. Big Tom, advance to supporting position. Wrench, machine gun ready for infantry. Thunderbolt lurched forward, emerging from the hedgerow into a small orchard that offered a clear line of fire into the village square. Parker's second tank was returning fire, its machine guns raking the buildings where the German guns were hidden. All units converging fire on the north side of the square, Mike ordered over the radio. Suspected multiple gun positions in those buildings. For 5 minutes, the American tanks poured fire into the village. The church tower partially collapsed. Several buildings burned. Eventually, the German guns fell silent. Cease fire, Mike ordered. Sound off. Parker's voice came over the radio, strained but alive. Ramrod 2, lost 1 tank, 3 wounded. Ramrod 3, operational. Ramrod 4, track damaged but guns operational. Mike did a quick calculation. 1 tank destroyed, another immobilized. Their force was already diminished before reaching their primary objective. Ramrod 2, can your wounded be evacuated? Affirmative, loading them into my tank now. Ramrod 4, can you effect repairs? Negative, need a maintenance crew. Mike keyed his radio to the command channel. Ramrod Actual, this is Thunderbolt. Belleville secured but at a cost. 1 tank lost, 1 immobilized. Request instructions. Winter's reply came immediately. Thunderbolt, leave Ramrod 4 in defensive position in the village. Proceed with remaining units to primary objective. Dawn assault is planned. Roger that. Out! Mike switched to the general channel. You heard the captain? Ramrod 3 and Ramrod 2 form on me. We move in 5 minutes. As the crews prepared to move out, Mike climbed down from his tank and walked toward the burning village. The smell of cordite and burning wood filled the air. In the flickering light of the fires, he could see German bodies near their gun positions. Most wore the field gray of Wehrmacht infantry, not the black of SS Panzer units. Regular army, not SS, said a voice beside him. Lieutenant Parker had joined him, his face streaked with soot and blood from a cut on his forehead. Village defense, not an elite unit. But they knew we were coming, Mike observed. That flare wasn't coincidence. Parker nodded grimly. Germans seem to be reading our mail, which means they probably know about our dawn attack too. What's the alternative? We have our orders. Mike stared at the burning church tower, thinking hard. We changed the plan, hit them now in the dark from an unexpected direction. Winters ordered a dawn attack, based on the assumption of surprise we no longer have. Mike turned to face Parker. If we wait until dawn, we're driving into another ambush. Parker considered this, then nodded slowly. I'll back your call, but you'll have to convince Winters. 20 minutes later, Mike had done exactly that. His argument was simple and compelling. Their only remaining advantage was unpredictability. Change the time, change the approach. Strike from where the Germans least expected. Winters agreed, with one significant alteration to Mike's proposal. You'll take your tank and Parker's on this night approach, he ordered. The rest of the company will proceed with the dawn attack as planned. Sir, that splits our force, Mike objected. Precisely. The Germans are anticipating concentrated dawn attack. Instead, they'll face a small probing force in the night, followed by what appears to be our main attack at dawn. Classic diversion tactic. Mike understood the strategy, but it meant his two tanks would be facing unknown German armor with minimal support. Sir, if we encounter the Tiger tanks, you withdraw immediately, Winters said firmly. Your mission is reconnaissance and harassment, not direct engagement with superior armor. Hit their support vehicles. Target fuel trucks if you find them. Create confusion, then pull back before dawn to let the main force engage. It was a sound tactical plan, if incredibly dangerous for the Night Raiders. But war was about calculated risks. Understood, sir. We'll move out immediately. By midnight, Thunderbolt and Parker's tank were working their way through a dense forest that aerial reconnaissance had marked as unoccupied. The going was slow, trees forcing them to weave a careful path. Both tanks ran without lights, relying on moonlight filtering through the canopy. How much further to the German position? Parker asked over the radio. Mike checked his map. About 3 kilometers. Forest ends in 1 kilometer. Then we have open ground to cross. Perfect place for an ambush. Stay alert. We'll pause at the forest edge to scout. The tanks continued their slow advance, the sound of their engines muffled by the dense vegetation. Mike stood in his hatch, every sense straining for danger signs. The forest was eerily quiet, no birds or animals making their normal night sounds. Not a good sign. Suddenly, Big Tom's voice called up from the driver's compartment. Commander, ground feels different, softer. Mike immediately signaled a halt. Back up, now! Too late. The forest floor beneath Thunderbolt gave way, revealing a camouflage pit. The tank's front end dropped sharply, throwing Mike against his hatch rim. The engine roared as Anderson tried to reverse, but the Sherman was stuck fast. Parker, hold position, Mike called into his radio. We've hit a tank trap. The forest erupted with German machine gun fire. Bullets pinged off Thunderbolt's armor like angry hornets. Eagle Eye, traverse left. Wrench coaxial machine gun on those muzzle flashes. The turret swung toward the source of enemy fire. Wilson and Romano returning fire with the coaxial machine gun. Parker's tank joined in, its 75mm cannon firing into the tree line where the heaviest German fire originated. Big Tom, full reverse. Get us out of this pit. Trying, sir. Tracks are spinning in mud. The Sherman's engine screamed as Anderson fought to extract them from the trap. Mike ducked down into the turret, grabbing the radio. Ramrod 2 were immobilized. Provide covering fire while we attempt to free ourselves. Roger that, Thunderbolt. Be advised, I'm picking up engine noise to the north. Could be armor. Mike's blood ran cold. If German tanks arrived while they were stuck, they'd be sitting ducks. Wrench, get out on my mark and attach the tow cable to that large oak. Big Tom, once it's secured, full reverse. Commander, that means exposing Wrench to enemy fire, Wilson objected. No choice. If we're still here when their armor arrives, we're all dead. Mike keyed his radio again. Parker, we need maximum suppressing fire on the north tree line. On my mark. Ready when you are. Mike took a deep breath. 3, 2, 1, mark! Parker's tank opened up with everything it had, cannon and machine guns raking the German positions. Mike shoved open his hatch. Go, Wrench, now! Romano scrambled out, tow cable in hand, and jumped down from the tank. Machine gun bullets kicked up dirt around him as he ran for the oak tree 20 yards away. Mike drew his .45 pistol and provided what covering fire he could from his exposed position. Wrench reached the tree, quickly wrapped the cable around its massive trunk, and secured it. He turned to run back, then suddenly pitched forward as a bullet struck him in the leg. "Man down!" Mike shouted. Without hesitation, he vaulted from the turret and ran toward his fallen crewman. Bullets whizzed past his head as he reached Romano, who was clutching his bleeding thigh. "Can you walk?" "Not fast, boss." Mike hoisted the smaller man onto his shoulder in a fireman's carry. "Hold tight." Staggering under the weight, Mike ran back toward the tank as Parker's gunner walked machine gun fire across the German positions. He reached Thunderbolt and practically threw Romano up onto the hull, then scrambled up after him. "Cable secured," Mike shouted down to Anderson. "Full reverse." The engine roared. Track spinning frantically. The tank shuddered, then slowly began to move backward as the cable went taut. With a grinding lurch, Thunderbolt pulled free from the pit. "Cable released," Big Tom called. "We're mobile." "Parker, we're clear. Fall back to Rally Point, Charlie." Both tanks began a fighting withdrawal, moving backward while maintaining fire on the German positions. Mike helped wrench down into the turret, then dropped in after him. "Eagle Eye, keep firing." "Big Tom, get us out of here." "Wrench, let me see that leg." Blood soaked Romano's pant leg. Mike cut away the fabric with his knife, revealing a bullet wound that had gone clean through the fleshy part of his thigh. "Hurts like hell, boss," Romano grimaced, "but I think it missed the bone." Mike applied a pressure bandage from the first aid kit. "You'll live, but you're sitting out the rest of this mission." "Like hell I am. I can still load with one good leg." Mike started to argue, but the determination in Romano's eyes stopped him. He'd want the same chance if their positions were reversed. "Your call, but tell me if it gets too much." "You got it, boss." The tanks continued their withdrawal until they reached a small clearing half a kilometer from the trap site. Mike ordered a brief halt to assess their situation. "Parker, status?" "Operational. Some small arms damage to external equipment. Nothing critical." "The German position was waiting for us," Mike said. "That trap was prepared in advance, which means they know about the dawn attack too." Mike nodded grimly. "We need to warn Winters, but first we need to complete our reconnaissance. There's still a chance we can salvage this mission." "How do you propose we proceed?" "The forest approach is compromised." Mike studied his map by the dim red light. "There's a ridge line to the east. If we can get up there before dawn, we'll have observation over the entire valley where the German armor is supposedly located. Risky move if they have patrols on the high ground. Everything's a risk at this point. We'll approach from the south, use the steepest route, less likely to be defended." Parker considered this, then nodded. "Lead the way." The tanks set off again, circumnavigating the forest and beginning a difficult climb up a steep, rocky slope. The Sherman strained against the incline, engines working at maximum effort. "Easy, Big Tom," Mike cautioned. "Steady pace, don't overheat the engine." "Doing my best, Commander. This hill's a beast." An hour of careful climbing brought them near the ridgeline. The eastern sky had begun to lighten almost imperceptibly, the first hint of approaching dawn. "Kill the engine," Mike ordered as they reached a position just below the ridge crest. "We'll proceed on foot to observe." Mike and Parker left their tanks with minimal crews and crawled the last 50 yards to the ridgeline. Reaching a position among some boulders, they carefully peered over into the valley beyond. What they saw made their blood run cold. Instead of the 5 Tiger tanks intelligence had reported, the valley held at least 15 German armored vehicles. 10 were indeed Tigers, their massive hulls unmistakable even in the pre-dawn light. The others were Panzer IVs and armored personnel carriers. And they weren't in defensive positions. They were formed in attack columns, engines running, clearly preparing to move out. "They're not waiting for our attack," Parker whispered. "They're preparing their own." Mike nodded, mind racing. "They'll hit Winter's main force as it approaches through the valley. Perfect ambush position. We have to warn them." Mike keyed his radio, but got only static in return. "Damn, the ridge is blocking transmission. We need to move to a better position." As they began to withdraw, a loose rock clattered down the slope. Both men froze. From below came a German voice, sharp with suspicion. "Wer ist da? Halt!" "Back to the tanks. Now," Mike hissed. They scrambled down the reverse slope as rifle fire erupted behind them. Reaching the tanks, Mike shouted to his crew, "Start engines! We've been spotted!" Both Shermans roared to life. As Mike climbed into his command hatch, German soldiers appeared on the ridgeline above them. "Reverse down the slope, fast as you can." The tanks began to back down the hill they had so laboriously climbed. German bullets pinged harmlessly off their armor. "Eagle Eye, Put some suppressing fire on that ridge." Wilson traversed the turret and fired several machine gun bursts at the ridgeline, forcing the German infantry to take cover. "We need to warn Winters," Mike called to Parker over the radio. "His force will be starting their approach soon." "We'll never make it back in time," Mike thought quickly, studying his map. "There's a farm 2 kilometers south. Might have a phone line we can use to call battalion." "Worth a shot, lead the way." The tanks picked up speed as they reached more level ground, racing against the rising dawn. The sky had lightened to a pale gray, silhouetting the landscape around them. "There!" Mike pointed to a stone farmhouse visible in the distance. "That must be it." As they approached, Mike scanned the property for signs of occupation. No smoke from the chimney, no livestock in the yard. Likely abandoned like many farms in the combat zone. The tanks pulled up to the farmhouse, and Mike quickly dismounted, pistol drawn. "Parker, cover me. I'll check for a phone." Mike approached the farmhouse cautiously, then kicked in the door. The interior was dark and dusty, clearly unoccupied for some time. He searched quickly, finding an old telephone mounted on the kitchen wall. To his relief, it had a dial tone when he lifted the receiver. Military communications had priority on the French telephone network, maintained for exactly this kind of emergency. He dialed the battalion headquarters number from memory. "Battalion operations," came a crisp voice. "This is Commander Sullivan, 2nd Armored. Priority message for Captain Winters, Charlie Company. German armor preparing counterattack in force from St. Lo Valley. At least 10 Tiger tanks plus support vehicles. Moving out imminently toward our planned approach route. Our dawn attack will run straight into them. Hold for confirmation." Several tense moments passed. Finally, the voice returned. Message authenticated, relaying to Captain Winters immediately. Hold position if possible for further instructions. Understood. Mike hung up and ran back to the tanks. Message delivered. We're to hold position for further instructions. Parker nodded, relief evident on his face. "Think they'll get the word to Winters in time?" "They'd better. Otherwise, we're about to lose a lot of good men and machines." They didn't have to wait long. 10 minutes later, the radio crackled to life with Winters' voice. "Thunderbolt, this is Ramrod Actual. Message received. Attack plan aborted. All units falling back to defensive positions at phase line Baker. Your new orders: maintain an observation of enemy armor movement from concealed position. Report direction and strength. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Confirm." "Ramrod Actual, this is Thunderbolt. Orders confirmed. Will maintain observation and report movement." "Good work, Sullivan. You've likely saved the company." Ramrod Actual out. Mike and Parker exchanged glances. "Back to the ridge?" Parker asked. "Different approach this time. There's a wooded hill to the west that should give us good observation with better cover." The tanks moved out, taking a circuitous route to avoid detection. By the time they reached the wooded hill, the sun had fully risen, revealing a clear summer day. From their new position, they had an excellent view of the valley and the German armor forming up. For the next 3 hours, they watched and reported as the German tank force advanced toward where the American attack would have come. When it became clear no Americans were coming, the Germans split into smaller units and began a methodical search of the area. "They're looking for us," Parker observed. "They know someone spotted them and warned off the main attack." Mike nodded. "And they'll keep looking. We should relocate again, find a route back to our lines." As they prepared to move out, Eagle Eye called up from his gunner's position. "Commander, vehicle approaching from the east. Looks like a German motorcycle with sidecar." Mike raised his binoculars. A lone motorcycle was indeed approaching, traveling fast along a dirt road that would pass near their position. "Dispatch rider," he murmured, "probably carrying orders to their forward units." A plan formed quickly in his mind. "Parker, hold position. We're going to intercept that motorcycle. Could give us valuable intelligence. Pretty small target for a tank. We don't shoot, we capture. Big Tom, position us behind that hedgerow where the road curves. We'll let him get close, then block his path." The Sherman moved quickly into position, concealed behind the ancient hedgerow. They could hear the motorcycle approaching, its engine growing louder. "Ready? Now!" Big Tom gunned the engine, sending the Sherman crashing through the hedgerow directly into the path of the oncoming motorcycle. The German rider swerved violently, losing control and skidding into a ditch. Before he could recover, Mike was out of the tank, pistol drawn, covering the dazed rider. "Hands up, Hände hoch!" The German slowly raised his hands. He was young, barely 20, with a lieutenant's insignia on his collar. "Eagle Eye, cover me," Mike called. Wilson emerged from the tank, rifle ready, as Mike approached the German officer. English? Mike demanded. The German nodded sullenly. Yes. What's in the satchel? Personal items only. Mike kept his pistol trained on the German as he picked up the leather dispatch case that had fallen nearby. Inside were several sealed envelopes marked with SS insignia. These look official, not personal. Mike pocketed the dispatches. On your feet, you're coming with us. They secured the German officer in Parker's tank and destroyed the motorcycle. As they prepared to move out, Mike examined the captured dispatches. Most were in coded German, but one contained a map with clear markings showing planned German movements for the next 48 hours. This is exactly what Division needs, Mike told Parker. Shows their entire planned counteroffensive. Our little detour just paid off big. Mike nodded, keying his radio. Ramrod Actual, this is Thunderbolt. We've captured a German dispatch rider with documents detailing enemy movements. Request rendezvous coordinates for delivery. Winters came back immediately with coordinates for a rendezvous point 10 kilometers to their southwest. As they set off, Mike felt a cautious optimism. They had prevented an ambush, captured valuable intelligence, and done so with minimal casualties. Perhaps the tide was turning. That optimism lasted precisely 23 minutes. They were traversing a shallow valley when Parker's tank suddenly erupted in flames, its turret flying skyward in a catastrophic explosion. No warning, no sound of incoming fire. One moment Parker's Sherman was there, the next it was a burning hulk. Ambush! Hard left! Mike shouted to Big Tom. Get us behind that ridgeline. Thunderbolt veered sharply, seeking cover as a massive shell screamed overhead, missing them by meters. Through his binoculars, Mike caught a glimpse of what they faced, the unmistakable profile of a Tiger tank, its long 88mm gun tracking them from nearly a kilometer away. Tiger, 10 o'clock, 900 meters, Mike called down. He's got the range advantage. We need to close or hide. Closing with a Tiger is suicide, Eagle Eye protested. So is running in the open. Big Tom, get us to those trees, then swing wide to approach from his flank. Anderson guided the Sherman toward a small copse of trees as another 88mm round landed nearby, showering them with dirt. Once behind cover, he swung the tank in a wide arc, using the terrain to mask their movement as they attempted to circle behind the German tank. Eagle Eye, load armor piercing. We'll only get one shot at his side armor. Already loaded, boss. Wrench, how's that leg? Hurts like hell, Romano replied through gritted teeth, but I'll manage. They approached cautiously from behind a low ridge, the Tiger now approximately 500 meters away, its attention still focused on their previous position. Hold here, Mike ordered. Perfect firing position. Eagle Eye, aim for the rear armor joined below the turret. That's their weakest point. Wilson adjusted his sights carefully. Target acquired. Fire when ready. The Sherman's 75mm roared. The shell streaking toward the massive German tank. A direct hit. The shell struck exactly where Mike had indicated, but to his horror, it seemed to merely scratch the Tiger's thick armor. No penetration, Wilson called in disbelief. Reloading. The Tiger's turret was already swinging toward them, alerted to their position by their shot. Move now, don't give him a stationary target. Thunderbolt lurched forward as Wilson fired again. This time the shell struck the Tiger's track, damaging but not disabling it. The German tank fired in return, its 88mm shell screaming just over their turret. We can't win this fight head-on, Mike realized. New plan, Big Tom, full speed toward that farmhouse. We'll use the buildings for cover, then flank around to the creek bed. The Sherman raced toward a small cluster of farm buildings 300 meters away. Another German shell landed behind them, the Tiger's gunner still finding their range. They reached the farmhouse just as the Tiger fired again, the shell demolishing a stone barn they had passed moments before. Using the buildings as cover, they circled around to a dry creek bed that offered concealment for their approach. Get us within 200 meters, Mike instructed. Their turret can't depress enough to hit us if we're close under their gun. That's mighty close to a Tiger, boss, Anderson said nervously. It's our only shot. Thunderbolt advanced through the creek bed, the German tank visible in glimpses through the brush along the bank. 250 meters, 220, 200. Eagle Eye, aim for the junction between the hull and turret ring, point-blank range. Target acquired. Fire! The Sherman's gun roared, the shell slamming into the Tiger at nearly point-blank range. This time they saw results. Sparks flew from the impact point, and the German turret stopped its rotation. Hit! Again! Wilson fired a second round at the same spot. The Tiger's engine suddenly roared to life, the massive tank beginning to turn toward them. One more! Fire! A third shot struck home. Suddenly, smoke began pouring from the German tank. Its hatches flew open, and crew members scrambled out. "We did it!" Romano shouted. "We killed a tiger!" "Not yet," Mike said grimly. "Big Tom, ram them. Hit their track assembly." "Ram a tiger?" Anderson asked incredulously. "Do it!" Thunderbolt surged forward, slamming into the Tiger's track system with enough force to throw Mike against his hatch rim. The German tank lurched sideways, its damaged track now completely immobilized. "Eagle Eye, target their engine compartment. Fire!" One final shot into the Tiger's engine compartment ignited its fuel. Flames erupted from the rear of the massive tank, quickly engulfing it. The remaining crew members who hadn't escaped had abandoned their positions, running for cover. "Hold fire," Mike ordered. "Let them go." For a moment, the crew of Thunderbolt sat in stunned silence, realizing what they had accomplished. A Sherman had just defeated a Tiger in direct combat, something that happened rarely in this war of mismatched armor. "I can't believe we just did that," Wilson said quietly. "Believe it," Mike replied, "but don't celebrate yet. We still need to deliver those documents and get back to our lines." As they prepared to move out, Mike took a last look at the burning Tiger. Its massive bulk, still imposing even in defeat, was a sobering reminder of the challenges they faced. For every Tiger they managed to destroy, the Germans had many more, and they wouldn't all be caught by surprise as this one had been. The documents they carried might help even those odds. Intelligence about enemy movements could save countless American lives. The mission had been costly. Parker and his entire crew lost, Romano wounded, but not in vain. Mike keyed his radio. "Ramrod Actual, this is Thunderbolt. Tiger destroyed at grid reference Juliet 47. One enemy dispatch rider captured with intelligence documents. Proceeding to rendezvous point." Winter's voice came back, surprise evident even through the static. "Confirmed, Thunderbolt. You engaged and destroyed a Tiger tank?" "Affirmative, Sherman 1, Tiger 0. A pause then. "Well done, Commander. That'll be one for the books. Proceed to rendezvous. Ramrod Actual out." As Thunderbolt moved out, leaving the burning German tank behind, Mike felt the weight of command pressing down on him. They had won this small victory, but the larger battle continued. Parker and his crew were gone. Countless others had fallen and would fall before this war ended. In his mind, he heard his father's voice again. "When the shell hits, you have 15 seconds to decide, to live or die." Today they had chosen to live. Tomorrow would bring its own decisions. The war had truly begun for Michael Steel Mike Sullivan. The crucible of combat was forging him, just as it had forged his father a generation before. The legacy continued, written in steel and fire. July 1950, near Chorwon Valley, Korea. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight, the Korean peninsula's humid air thick enough to chew. Major Michael Sullivan wiped sweat from his forehead as he studied the terrain map spread across the hood of his Jeep. 6 years had passed since the crucible of World War II, yet here he was again, commanding tanks in another war on another continent. "Artillery positions confirmed here and here," Lieutenant Cooper said, pointing to marked locations on the map. "Chinese have been moving reinforcements through this valley for the past 3 days." Mike nodded, eyes tracing the contours of the rugged landscape. Korea was nothing like the French countryside. No gentle rolling hills or ancient hedgerows. This was a land of steep mountains and narrow valleys, where tanks were often confined to predictable routes. Perfect killing zones for enemy artillery. "And our mission remains the same?" Mike asked. "Counterattack force for Colonel Will's regiment?" "Yes, sir. 7th Cavalry is holding the main ridge. We're their insurance policy if the Chinese break through." Mike folded the map carefully. At 28, he was younger than most officers of his rank. The silver oak leaves on his collar earned through combat experience rather than years of service. The Korean conflict had pulled him back from civilian life just as he was beginning to adjust to peace. "Brief the platoon commanders. We move to forward positions at Oro 500. As Cooper departed, Mike turned to survey his command. 5 M4A3E8 Shermans, the Easy 8 variant with improved gun and suspension, plus 3 of the newer M26 Pershing tanks with 90mm guns. Not the massive armored force he'd commanded in the final days of World War II, but a potent strike force nonetheless. His gaze settled on the lead Sherman, its hull scarred by 6 years of weather, but still bearing the faded name Thunderbolt II on its turret. Not his original tank from Normandy, that veteran had been left behind in Europe, but a worthy successor that had already proven itself in the early days of this conflict. From inside the tank, Technical Sergeant Joseph Romano emerged, his face smeared with grease, a wrench still clutched in his hand. The slight limp from his World War II leg wound was barely noticeable now. "How's she running, Wrench?" Mike called. Romano grinned, wiping his hands on a rag. "Purring like a kitten, boss. New transmission's working beautifully." "And the gun?" "Eagle Eye's been adjusting the sights all afternoon. Says he can hit a cigarette at 1,000 yards. Mike smiled at the mention of Master Sergeant Charles Wilson, his longtime gunner. Easy 8 Charlie Wilson was now one of the most respected tank gunners in the 8th Army, with 17 confirmed kills to his credit. "Where's Big Tom?" Mike asked, looking around for the final member of his original crew. Romano's face fell. "Got another letter from Iowa today. His boy's starting high school next month. Missing all of it." Mike nodded, understanding the weight of separation. Thomas Anderson had returned to his family farm after World War II, determined to never leave again. Yet when Korea erupted, he'd been among the first reservists called up. His sense of duty had trumped his desire to watch his children grow. As twilight settled over the camp, Mike walked among his men, checking preparations, answering questions, offering encouragement. Leadership wasn't just about tactics and strategy, it was about knowing your people, their strengths, their fears, their breaking points. In his tent that night, Mike wrote in his journal by lamplight, maintaining the habit his father had established a generation earlier. These pages would be his legacy should the worst happen, a record of what he had witnessed, what he had learned. He paused, pen hovering over the page, memories suddenly flooding back. The bridge ambush in Normandy, the trap in the forest, the burning Tiger tank, the faces of men who hadn't come home, Parker and his crew, Captain Winters killed by artillery 3 months before Germany's surrender. And beneath it all, the constant pressure of command, the knowledge that every order might send men to their deaths, the burden his father had carried silently for decades after World War I. Mike closed the journal, suddenly too tired to write more. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing its own challenges, its own decisions, its own 15-second intervals when lives hung in the balance. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of burning tanks and screaming men. Dawn arrived with the distant rumble of artillery, the Chinese making their presence known along the front lines. Mike stood atop Thunderbolt II's turret, binoculars trained on the mountain ridges where Colonel Wills's infantry regiment held defensive positions. "Status report," he called into his radio handset. "All tanks operational and in position, sir," came the response from his executive officer. "Fuel topped off, ammunition loaded, crew standing by. Maintain current positions. Be prepared to move on my command." The morning stretched on, the artillery duel intensifying. Through his binoculars, Mike could see Chinese shells impacting along the American positions, plumes of dirt and smoke marking their fall. The 7th Cavalry returned fire, their own artillery walking down the reverse slopes where Chinese infantry would be forming up. At 1100 hours, his radio crackled with urgency. "Thunderbolt, this is Mustang 6. Chinese have broken through at Checkpoint Charlie. Infantry moving in force down the eastern valley. Armor reported supporting their advance. You are cleared to engage. Stop that breakthrough." Colonel Will's voice was strained but controlled. The situation was critical, but not yet catastrophic. "Mustang 6, this is Thunderbolt. Moving to engage now." Mike switched to his command channel. "All tanks, this is Sullivan. Enemy breakthrough at Checkpoint Charlie, Eastern Valley. Form on me in wedge formation. We move in 2 minutes." The response was immediate. Engines roared to life. Turrets traversed to forward positions. Crews secured hatches and equipment. "Big Tom, take us down the access road. Best speed." "Roger that, boss," Anderson replied from the driver's compartment. Thunderbolt 2 lurched forward, leading the formation down the steep, rutted track toward the valley floor. The other tanks followed in precise formation, maintaining spacing despite the difficult terrain. "Enemy composition?" asked Wilson from his gunner's position. "Infantry with armor support, likely T-34s. Russian-made but Chinese-operated. Just like old times. Different enemy, same dance." Mike smiled grimly. The Soviet T-34 tanks were formidable, similar in many ways to the Shermans his unit operated. But his men had experience on their side, and the newer Pershings with their 90mm guns gave them a fighting edge they'd lacked in Europe. As they reached the valley floor, Mike could see the Chinese advance. hundreds of infantry flowing like a human river between the rocky outcroppings. Behind them, the unmistakable profiles of T-34 tanks, at least a dozen providing fire support. "Gunners, target enemy armor first," Mike ordered over the radio. "Pershings, take the lead elements. Shermans, focus on their second wave and flanks." The tank formation spread out, each vehicle finding firing positions behind natural cover. Mike stood in his hatch, directing the deployment, even as the first Chinese shells began landing around them. "Range to lead enemy tank, 1,200 yards, Wilson called up. "Fire when ready." Thunderbolt 2's 76mm gun roared, the shells screaming toward the distant T-34. A direct hit, but no penetration. The Chinese tank's sloped armor had deflected the shot. "Adjusting aim," Wilson called unfazed. "Loading armor piercing." Across the line, the American tanks opened fire. Two Pershings scored direct hits on Chinese tanks, their more powerful 90mm guns punching through the T-34's armor. Black smoke billowed from the stricken vehicles. "Enemy infantry deploying anti-tank teams," Mike observed through his binoculars. "All tanks, watch your flanks. Machine guns, suppress those teams." The battle escalated rapidly, the valley filling with smoke and dust as shells exploded and tanks maneuvered. Mike coordinated his force with practiced efficiency, directing fire, identifying threats, positioning assets where they could do the most damage. Wilson finally found his mark. Thunderbolt's shell penetrating a T-34's turret in a shower of sparks and flame. The Chinese tank slewed to a stop, smoke pouring from its hatches. "Target destroyed," Wilson reported calmly, acquiring next. For 30 minutes, the tank battle raged across the valley floor. The Americans destroyed 7 T-34s while losing one Pershing to a lucky hit that penetrated its ammunition storage. The Chinese infantry, deprived of their armored support, began to falter and fall back. Victory seemed within reach when Mike's radio suddenly erupted with urgent reports. "Multiple enemy aircraft inbound. Jets, take cover." Mike's blood ran cold. "All tanks disperse and seek overhead cover. Move now." The sky filled with the scream of jet engines as Soviet-made MiG-15s streaked overhead, their cannons strafing the American positions. This was a new threat, one they hadn't faced in World War II. The age of jet combat had arrived, and tanks caught in the open were painfully vulnerable. "Get to those trees," Mike shouted to Anderson, pointing to a small copse 200 yards away. Thunderbolt lurched forward, racing for cover as 37mm shells from the MiGs tore into the ground around them. They reached the trees just as another strafing run passed overhead. Through gaps in the foliage, Mike watched helplessly as one of his Shermans took direct hits from the aircraft, its turret erupting in flames as the crew abandoned the stricken vehicle. "All units report status," Mike called into his radio when the aircraft temporarily departed. The responses came in rapid succession. One Sherman destroyed, one Pershing immobilized but guns still operational. 2 tanks with minor damage, 3 still fully combat capable. Half his force effectively neutralized in minutes. "Chinese infantry regrouping," his forward observer reported. "Looks like they're preparing another push with their remaining armor." Mike assessed the situation quickly. His depleted force couldn't hold the valley against a determined Chinese assault, especially with enemy air support. But abandoning the position would leave Colonel Wills's right flank exposed. Pershing 2 and 3 formed defensive line here with Sherman 3. Hold position as long as possible. Thunderbolt and Sherman 4 will circle around to hit their assembly area from the flank. Divide their attention. It was a risky strategy, but standing still meant certain defeat. As Mike's 2 tank teams circled through a dried riverbed toward the Chinese assembly area, he couldn't help reflecting on similar maneuvers in Normandy. Different war, same principles. They approached the Chinese position from the east, using a rocky outcropping for cover. Through his binoculars, Mike could see Chinese officers directing troops and tanks for another assault. "Perfect," he murmured. "Eagle eye. Target that command group, 800 yards. Target acquired. Fire." Thunderbolt's gun roared, the shell landing squarely among the Chinese officers. The effect was immediate. Chaos erupted as the leadership vanished in an explosion of dirt and smoke. Sherman 4 targeted their fuel trucks. Fire at will. Both tanks opened up on the Chinese assembly area, shells raining down with deadly accuracy. Enemy tanks tried to respond, turning their turrets toward the new threat, but confusion hampered their effectiveness. "It's working," Mike told his crew. "Keep firing, then we'll relocate before they can organize a response." For 10 crucial minutes, they hammered the Chinese position, destroying 2 more tanks and numerous support vehicles. The planned Chinese assault faltered, troops scattering for cover rather than forming up. Colonel Will's voice came over the radio. "Thunderbolt, this is Mustang 6. Artillery strike inbound on enemy position in 2 minutes. Get your people clear." "Roger that, Mustang 6, withdrawing now." Mike ordered his tanks to fall back, rejoining the defensive line they had left. As they pulled into position, the sky erupted with whistling shells as American artillery pounded the Chinese assembly area. The barrage continued for 20 minutes, effectively ending any immediate threat. By late afternoon, reinforcements had arrived to secure the valley. Mike's tank force, battered but intact, withdrew to their original positions to rearm and repair. Colonel Lloyd Wills, a weathered cavalry officer with 30 years of service, personally visited their position as the sun began to set. "That was some fancy tank work, Sullivan," he said, clasping Mike's hand firmly. "Splitting your force like that was risky, but it broke their momentum at the critical moment. Just applied the lessons I learned in Europe, sir. Never let the enemy dictate the engagement." Wills nodded approvingly. "I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. Your action today saved a lot of American lives." "My men deserve the credit, sir." "They'll get it, but leadership starts at the top." Wills surveyed the tank company thoughtfully. "How would you feel about taking command of a rifle company?" Mike blinked in surprise. "Infantry, sir?" 7th Cavalry, 2nd Battalion, Charlie Company. Captain Johnson was evacuated yesterday. Shrapnel wound. They need a commander who understands combined arms operations. It was an unexpected offer, but one that stirred something in Mike. His father had commanded tanks, then returned to civilian life. But Mike had discovered something about himself in 2 wars. He was a soldier at heart, and the opportunity to command an infantry company, to work directly with the men on the ground, was compelling. "I'd be honored, sir." "Good. Report to Battalion HQ tomorrow morning. We'll sort the transfer paperwork." As Wills departed, Mike turned to find his original crew watching him. Big Tom, Eagle Eye, and Wrench had been with him since Normandy, through the liberation of Europe and now Korea. They knew what this meant. "So you're leaving us," Anderson said quietly. "New assignment, not my choice." Wilson nodded, understanding. "Infantry needs good commanders, too." "Won't be the same without you, boss," Romano added, his normally cheerful face solemn. Mike looked at each man in turn. These brothers forged in combat's crucible. "I'll always be a tanker at heart. That doesn't change. But sometimes we have to go where we're needed most." Before dawn the next morning, Mike visited Thunderbolt 2 one last time. In the gray pre-dawn light, the Sherman looked almost peaceful, its battle scars hidden by shadow. He placed a hand on its cold metal hull, feeling the connection to every battle they had fought together. "Take care of them," he whispered to the machine that had carried them through 2 wars. Then, gathering his gear, he headed toward the jeep that would take him to his new command. As he climbed aboard, a familiar voice called out, "Hey, boss, hold up!" Romano limped toward him, something clutched in his hand. "From all of us," he said, pressing the object into Mike's palm, "so you don't forget where you came from." It was a tank commander's hatchlock, worn smooth by years of use, mounted on a base of polished wood. A simple plaque read, "Thunderbolt Crew, Normandy to Korea." Mike swallowed the lump in his throat. "I could never forget." "Infantry's lucky to get you," Romano said gruffly. "Don't let them walk into any ambushes." "I'll keep them safe," Mike promised, knowing it was a promise no commander could truly keep, but one every good leader made anyway. As the jeep pulled away, Mike looked back at the tank company one last time. Another chapter closing, another beginning, the wheel of war turning once again. October 1995, Washington, D.C. Michael Sullivan's weathered hand closed around the small wooden plaque. The tank hatch lock, still smooth from decades of handling. 45 years had passed since Korea, yet the memories remained sharp as ever. The crowd gathered around the World War II memorial had grown as he spoke, drawn by the authentic voice of experience. Young servicemen and women in crisp uniforms. Elderly veterans with medals pinned to civilian jackets. Families with children too young to understand, but old enough to listen. "I commanded infantry in Korea," Sullivan continued his story, voice strong despite his 75 years. Later served as a training officer during Vietnam. 27 years of service in total. A young Army captain in the front row raised his hand. "Sir, what was the most important lesson you learned as a tank commander?" Sullivan considered the question carefully. So many lessons, so many hard truths learned in combat's unforgiving classroom. "In a tank, you never fight alone," he said finally. 5 men in a steel box, absolutely dependent on each other. The driver can't see where he's going without the commander's guidance. The gunner can't find targets without the commander's eyes. The commander can't fight without the gunner's skill. Every man essential, every role critical. He paused, looking across the faces before him. But the most important lesson was about time. When your tank is hit, you have 15 seconds to decide, to act, to live or die. No third option. Sullivan gestured to the Sherman tank displayed nearby, its restored hull gleaming in the autumn sun. That lesson stayed with me through 3 wars and into civilian life. We all face moments when decisions must be made, when hesitation means disaster, when the path forward isn't clear but standing still isn't an option. From the back of the crowd, a tall man with silver hair pushed forward. Thomas Anderson Jr., son of Big Tom, come to hear the commander his father had served under for 2 wars. My father said you could smell a German ambush from 5 miles away, the younger Anderson called out. Said you saved their lives more times than he could count. Sullivan smiled, memories of his faithful driver flooding back. Big Tom had returned to his Iowa farm after Korea, raising children and corn with equal dedication until his peaceful passing in 1987. Your father was being generous. Truth is, we saved each other. He never talked much about the war, Anderson Jr. continued, but he talked about you, about Thunderbolt. Said those were the most important years of his life, despite everything. Sullivan nodded, understanding. Many veterans kept their war experiences locked inside, too painful or profound to share even with loved ones. Some burdens aren't meant to be passed down, he said quietly. Your father carried his with dignity. As the formal presentation concluded, Sullivan found himself surrounded by visitors eager to share their own connections to the tankers of World War II. A woman whose uncle had died at St. Lo, a retired colonel who had trained on Shermans in the 1950s, a history teacher seeking first-hand accounts for his students. Sullivan answered each with patience, understanding their need to connect with a fading chapter of history, but his attention kept returning to Anderson's son, who waited quietly at the edge of the group. When the crowd finally thinned, Sullivan approached him. You came a long way from Iowa, Anderson Jr. nodded. Dad would have wanted to be here. He kept track of you, you know, followed your career, kept a scrapbook of newspaper clippings whenever your name appeared. Sullivan hadn't known this, and the revelation touched him deeply. I have something for you, Anderson Jr. continued, reaching into his jacket. He withdrew a yellowed envelope, creased from decades of storage. Dad wrote this near the end, asked me to deliver it if I ever met you. Sullivan accepted the envelope with a hand that trembled slightly. The handwriting on the front was instantly familiar. Big Tom's neat, precise script spelling out for Commander Sullivan. Would you like some privacy, sir? Anderson Jr. asked. Sullivan nodded gratefully. Finding a bench overlooking the reflecting pool, he carefully opened the long sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of notepaper dated June 1987. Dear Commander, if you're reading this, Tommy found you like I asked, and I'm long gone. There's something I never told you, something I've carried since Normandy. That day at the German tank trap in the forest, when you ran out under fire to save Wrench, I saw something you didn't. A German with a Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon, taking aim at you both. He had you dead to rights. I had a choice in that moment. Stay at the controls as ordered, or abandon my post to stop that German. I chose to climb out and use my sidearm, got him with my third shot just before he fired. I never reported this because it meant I'd left my position without orders, but I'd make the same choice again. You saved us all countless times with your quick thinking and courage. That once I returned the favor. We all have our 15 seconds, Commander. That was mine. Your faithful driver, Thomas Big Tom Anderson. Sullivan stared at the letter, vision blurring with unexpected tears. All these years, he'd never known how close death had come in that French forest. Never known that his life continued because his driver had made the same kind of split-second decision he himself had made so often. Anderson Jr. approached cautiously. Sir, are you all right? Sullivan carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. Your father was a greater man than I ever knew, and I already thought the world of him. He said the same about you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 generations connected by the invisible threads of shared experience. One inherited, one lived. Will you join me for dinner? Sullivan asked finally. I'd like to hear more about your father's life after the war, and I have some stories about him that perhaps he never shared. I'd like that very much, sir. As they walked toward the exit, Sullivan found himself reflecting on the long journey that had brought him here. From troubled Detroit teenager to decorated veteran of 3 wars. From tank commander to infantry officer to training instructor. From young man to elder, carrying the memories of battles long past and comrades long gone. His father's journal remained among his most treasured possessions, its weathered pages a bridge between generations of men who had faced war's crucible and emerged transformed. Sullivan had added his own volumes to that legacy, recording his experiences for future generations who might need to understand what war truly meant to those who fought it. The wheel had turned full circle. The lessons learned in Sherman tanks across France now passed to new generations who would face their own crucibles, their own 15-second decisions. As the autumn sun began to set behind the Washington Monument, casting long shadows across the mall, Michael Steel Mike Sullivan walked tall, the burden of memory balanced by the satisfaction of a life fully lived, of duties faithfully executed, of lessons hard learned and freely shared. Some men were forged in fire, tempered by adversity, shaped by the impossible choices of war. Some men emerged from that forge stronger, not harder, wiser, not bitter, grateful for each day that followed those critical 15 seconds when life hung in the balance. In his pocket, Sullivan carried the small wooden plaque with its tank hatch lock, smooth from decades of handling, a tangible connection to the machines that had carried them through hell, to the men who had become more than friends, to the legacy that continued in classrooms and memorial services and quiet conversations between veterans and those who sought to understand. The Iron Commander had completed his mission. The stories were told, the lessons preserved, the sacrifices honored, and in that, there was peace.